Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm going to be playing in the M3Y. In full disclosure, this is a tank that significantly surprised me. Usually when I'm grinding up a tech tree of new tanks, and this is the Tier 8 Yo American Heavy which has just gone into the game last week, you kind of don't really think about, your Tier 7 and your Tier 8 vehicles, and you want to think about Tier 9 starts to get exciting, and you want to think, whoa, Tier 10, as we saw in the gameplay from Japan Hunter on the video on Sunday. The Tier 10 can be very exciting indeed. So when I'm making my way up a tech tree, it's usually kind of like the Tier 7 and Tier 8 tanks that you kind of brush aside, you don't really think about it. You think about trying to get through them as quickly as you can to be able to get up to the top tier tanks with all the awesome mechanics and all of the fun, right? That's actually not the case with the Tier 8. The M3Y took me by surprise massively as a vehicle that is actually, I would go as far as to say, one of the best Tier 8s in the game, at least for me and my playstyle. And that is absolutely fabulous, considering it's a tech tree tank that everybody could be able to get. Now, why do I love this tank so much? Well, firstly, that it almost feels like it has an autoloader without having an autoloader. And that's because when you start to pump up the rate of fire of this tank, you're kind of firing at least about 12 rounds a minute if you're using a gun rammer vents and you've got a good crew. And while the alpha damage, bigger is not always better with this gun here. On the 90mm that I think is the superior gun inside this tank is only 240. When you combine that with this crazy rate of fire, this gun absolutely packs a punch. In fact, it has one of the highest damage per minute of any Tier 8 tank. Well, heavy tank I should say. And that is only just trumped a little bit, I believe, by the regular Carnarvon, while vehicles like the Carnarvon Action 10 have a very similar playstyle to this. But unlike the Carnarvon Action 10, which has a bit of a weak point on top, this one has a small one, right? Look at that tiny cupola on top, and it's not even that bad. This thing has pretty darn okay hull armor. It's not incredible, it's probably a little bit worse than the Carnarvon Action 10, I'd say, if you are hiding your lower plate and using your gun depression, but it is not shabby at all. When you combine this with great aim time, pretty good gun handling, good enough so that I can actually drop vertical stabilizers on this tank and instead invest in amplifying the DPM with the gun rammer. And even though I took a little bit of a look to the left there, worried about the SU-152, this was a bit of a misplay in the battle here. I probably should have just closed the distance and not sat here, but I was worried about the M2Y taking chunks out of me as I decided to progress against them. And I found that with a vehicle like this, you almost need to just plant yourself and stand and bang with your opponents. Because if you're moving in between your shots, then you never really have enough time to be able to fully aim. Now obviously, if I was to use vertical stabilizers on this tank, and many of you probably will end up using vert stabs on this vehicle, I probably could be a little bit more mobile. But the way that I have set this vehicle up is to maximize the DPM with the gun rammer and the vents, and then to still have decent mobility by using a turbo. And that has allowed me to play this thing as a bit of an all-purpose kind of medium heavy. When we look at it, it kind of looks like a bit like an M103 or even an M48, like quintessentially an American tank, right? I can tell you that this thing hull down, unless you're getting clubbed by high penetration rounds, is absolutely lethal. And when you get yourself into a fairly nice matchup like this, where you're dealing with Tier 8 and Tier 7 tanks, I'm loving the speed, I'm loving the aggression, and I'm loving having the DPM and the turret when I'm in that position. Alright, so here comes probably one of the best Tier 7 tanks in the game, the T-29. We're going to track them once, we're going to retract them in that position, and oh dear, even the 10 degrees of gun depression this T-29 has is not going to be enough. I'm going to hold them still until they whiff a shell, and I'm going to make my way over towards the left to be able to shoot them in the tracks, and I probably could have linked in another shot there, but I just want to look after my hit points, and considering that I've got an IS pressuring them in the side, and even their own artillery is stunning them, I don't need to be too concerned. So I decide to fire a high explosive round up there. It actually tracks and also deals 38 damage, and then I follow it up with an AP shell to finish off the T-29. But oh my lord. One thing that happened to me during the stream yesterday as I played this vehicle for the first time is I was saying my old catchphrase of "it's always a Scorpion." However, it's no longer always a Scorpion, it's also a Soviet Scorpion in the form of the SU-130PM. And my hit points just get lower and lower as the artillery manages to take off another 83. Now, I'm pretty sure I hit the T-28 there, but we'll have to see whether he reappears on 800 hit points. And you'll see when I have a rate of fire like this, I like to fire a lot blind. We fired a lot blind at the SU-152 earlier, and I wanted to see if I could follow up a shot on the T-28. And I'm kind of fairly isolated here when we actually take a look at it. I've got an ISU-152 that's backing me up. Unfortunately, the IS has fallen to the enemy team, and it's pretty much me and 191 hit points against what feels like the world, although in reality, it's just a few vehicles on the enemy team that we're going to have to deal with. So it looks like we might have managed to hit the T-28 there. Were they on 800 hit points? They're now down to 676. That's going to help because now I can actually manage to vanquish this tank in 3 shots with my 240 alpha damage. I actually press my F7 key. Actually, I don't. I asked the ISU-152 for a bit of a shot. Now I've got a tricky situation. Do I go for the damage here or do I go for trying to track my opponent? I decide to go for the damage, and then I wedge myself up, and unfortunately I bounce 1 shell, but I still should possibly be able to get 2 shells out before the T-28 reloads, but just in time, an SU-100M1 decides to come and try and flank me. Now, I actually managed to track myself a little bit there on the SU-100M1, but oh dear, this is awkward. Yeah, one of the most awkward things that you could possibly have, being in a tank without a turret, being reversed, and while the enemy artillery stuns me, they don't actually manage to do much damage to me, leaving me on 102 hit points, and I have a little bit of a wiggle of the turret for managing to get through that 1 versus 2 scenario. Woo! That was pretty intense. The ISU-152, at least he was arriving to be able to finish off the SU in that scenario. And I would have died there probably if I didn't have the reserve track mechanic on this tank. If I didn't manage to keep making those micro movements to be able to then actually repair the track, I probably wouldn't have been able to reverse against the SU-100M1 there. And also, if I didn't have the turbo on this tank, I would have fallen in that situation as well. It's really interesting when I'm streaming. Oh, there we go. Nice bounce from the Type 59, a gold round there, ricocheted off my tank. And you just see that this tank can do it all. It's really interesting when I'm streaming that everybody's quick to point out, oh, you didn't use vertical stabilizers, so you're missing a few of your shells. Sure, but nobody ever actually realizes when it's either, say, like the turbo in a situation like that, which manages to allow us to reverse and, oh dear. Blooming SU-130 PM, they definitely had it in for me yesterday, and I guess a little bit of a greedy play there by me to try and go for the Chi-Ri. I guess I could have gone closer towards the building and used that building for cover. Looks like, unfortunately for me, the SU saw me through this gap and put a clean round into the side of my tank. Nevertheless, it's just a little bit of greed at the end of the game to try and keep that momentum going. We're up to 5,500 combined in this battle that we saw, and also the 4 kills. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I can't tell you how refreshing it is to play a vehicle that really matches my playstyle. Aggressive with enough armor to keep you in the fight, DPM to be able to cut your way through your opponents, and if you can tame the wild 90mm rate of fire, it is oh so refreshing to have a tech tree tank that could probably pass off as a premium with regards to how powerful it is in World of Tanks. But calling this thing a renegade, yeah, its win ratio isn't quite pumping up that far, which still has the key strengths of higher alpha damage, actually 50% extra alpha damage compared to the M3Y, much better dispersion when you're moving, I would say better hull armor, and the 10 meters extra view range on the Renegade allow you to never have to worry about using coated optics on that tank once you manage to get your crew up to a good level. But statistically, when we take a look at the M3Y, it's packing the highest DPM in this comparison, comparable penetration with beautiful APCR rounds, with a lovely shell velocity, fantastic heat penetration at 290, and I was able to welcome all of those WZ-114 drivers to the game yesterday with some filthy pay-to-win action of my own in, albeit a tech tree tank. Just really nice gun handling all in all across the board here for a smaller caliber gun, and the mobility, while it doesn't have the grunt in the engine or the top speed of the other tanks, its better ground resistances actually mean that this one will be faster on medium terrain. And once you get a turbo on it, it's probably even going to be better on hard terrain than something like a Renegade. And unlike the other 2 tanks, which have horrendous weak points on top, The actual M3Y, while it does have a bit of a weak point on top, it's not nearly so prominent, and it's just basically like a weakness rather than a weak point of the two premium American heavy tanks. So all in all, the M3Y was definitely a tank that surprised me yesterday. I wasn't expecting this thing to be nearly as good as it actually ended up, and I can't wait to get back into the tech tree and grind it more today on stream. I've decided with this tech tree, instead of racing and trying to get the tier 10 as quickly as possible, and also it might have had something to do with the fact that I was doing a mission marathon on my free-to-play account last week, that I wanted to take my time with this tech tree and not just skip all the tanks and get a real vibe for how they play out. And the M3Y, it's definitely one that surprised me yesterday. And so I'm certainly glad that I did take my time and discover this little gem instead of just skip your way up towards the tier 9 and the tier 10 as quickly as possible. So this was an ace tanker for the M3Y. We get a high caliber for the 4,200 damage that we dealt, meaning that we actually hit quite a lot of shots blind in this game, in addition to the 2,331 damage upon detecting, giving us 6,500 combined actually. And if any of you are trying to figure out exactly how hard it is to get an ace tanker in this vehicle, that was 1,573 base experience, and I had many games that were between about 1,400 and 1,500 yesterday in this tank that were all first class medals. But be warned, I did fire a few high explosive anti-tank rounds here against the T28, so without a premium account I would have lost a little bit, but I made a decent profit as I'm running one on my main account at the moment. So all in all, the M3Y, definitely one that's worth a look at if you are an aggressive player who wants to have the damage per minute to be able to cut through your opponents. This is not the tank for a player who doesn't want to fire multiple shots. This is not the tank for a player who doesn't want to engage and just take shots to make vastly more shots and usually outtrade anything that's equal tier and lower. But for any of you confident, aggressive players out there, yeah, it's quite nice to be able to recommend a tank that for once isn't a premium tier 8. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that's it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments whether you have decided to start going up the Yo Tank tech tree. If you have, where are you in the tech tree? If you haven't, what's stopping you from going for them? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.